Motivated by hatred and malice, anti-trans people have been trying to write trans people out of the history of the gay rights movement for years, but as of late, it has become a sickeningly prominent talking point amongst those in gender-critical anti-trans spaces. The misinformation I'm going to address today is this. They claim that Marsha P. Johnson was not a trans woman, but a gay man's drag persona. And they claim that anyone saying that Marsha was trans and identified as a woman is retconning history to further a political agenda. The transgender, if you will. And you will. There's one thing we can all agree on. There's a lot of misinformation out there about Marsha P. Johnson. But what anti-trans people don't want you to know, and what they're praying you never realize, is that there's a lot of real information too. She died only 30 years ago, and her life is extensively documented and accounted for. And all of it is available online for anyone willing to put in the time. And I did. If you want a more thorough discussion of her full life, be sure to check out the video about her on my second channel, Respect the Dead, where we usually don't, but this time we do. I'm going to present the argument from the source of most of these Marsha wasn't trans claims verbatim, so I can't be accused of straw manning. And then I'll show you actual evidence that they're entirely full of it, that they're blatantly lying to you, and they think you'll buy it because they don't think very highly of you.
We were not led by drug-addled, homeless, mentally ill, criminal drag queens. Marsha Johnson always said he was a gay man. Get off the internet and read a history book. It won't hurt you. At least have the decency to wait until we're all gone before you rob us of our history.
This piece of work is ex-police officer and ex-gay Fred Sargent, an anti-trans gay man who calls himself a Stonewall veteran. But we'll get into how true or false that might be later. Let's look at the evidence presented by people like Fred Sargent when asked to back up their claim that Marsha P. Johnson was a gay man, not a trans woman. It's pretty much always this one single clip taken from the documentary Pay It No Mind, even though the creators of it have attested Marsha is a trans woman.
You know, I would tell them I was a boy and I was in drag, and I would tell them that I would go like hustling, and would they want to go out? And they say yes, I want to go out. And then when they get up in the hotel and I take off all my clothes, they say, I can't believe it, you're a boy.
And that's where the clip they'll show us ends. Only, that's not where it actually ends. Marsha goes on to say,
and I take off all my clothes, and I can't believe it, you're a boy. That I noticed me and couldn't sleep, I was a real woman, honey. I'm just a transvestite.
So clearly she saw herself as a woman, except the language used is different to the language we use decades later, where someone today might say, I'm trans feminine, and people often don't know I was assigned male at birth. Marsha would say things like, I'm a woman, and sometimes people don't believe I'm really a boy, as in not a cis woman. There's a lot of discussion on the nebulous nature of the uses back then for terms like transsexual and drag queen, so I'm gonna let Marsha define them for us, then I'm gonna try and meet her like halfway from the future. A drag queen is one that usually goes to a ball, and that's the only time she gets dressed up. A transsexual spends most of her life in drag. When you're a transsexual, you have hormone treatments, and you're on your way to a sex change, and you never come out of female clothes. Here, it's pretty clear that when Marsha uses the term drag, she means dressing as a woman or wearing women's clothes, and drag queen is someone who does that for entertainment, and a transsexual is someone who does that full time and intends on transitioning. This is not too far off from what we say today, but I'll try and find some middle ground. I think pretty much even the staunchest of anti-trans people would agree that a drag queen is someone who performs as a woman, whether they like it or not, with a drag name and a persona, but this is for entertainment. While the queens in drag, they go by their drag name and probably use she, her pronouns, but at the end of the night, they go home, get out of drag, and their persona is gone, like an actor after a scene is over. Out of drag, they often identify as a gay or queer man, and do not use their drag name or she, her pronouns. A transsexual or transgender woman, though many anti-trans people would say no such person exists, is someone assigned male at birth who identifies as a woman, not for performing for others, but because they hold a genuine feeling that they are a woman at all times. At the end of the night, she's not taking off her drag, she's a woman taking off her makeup. They say Marsha was the first of these, a drag queen, that she performed as a woman but never saw herself as one or claimed to be one. This is objectively, undeniably, and offensively untrue. They're lying to you, and they're doing it intentionally. And this kind of misinformation is so prevalent because when you're online, it's difficult to know what or who to believe. There's so much going on in the world, and keeping up with what's been debunked or is flat out misinformation is incredibly difficult and time consuming. And it's tough to know what the truth actually is. As I said, the claim that Marsha was a man who simply did drag but did not identify as a woman is just not true. From the very same documentary they use as their main evidence, Marsha states several times that she saw herself as a woman. One of these times we already saw, where she says, "I noticed men couldn't see I was a real woman." And the next is from an interview recorded on June 26, 1992, a week before her death.
When I became a drag queen, I started to live my life as a woman.
I think we can agree that a drag queen is not defined as someone who lives life as a woman, but someone who performs as one. Obviously, there's overlap here as many trans people do drag, but it's their transness that describes the way they live as a woman, not their performance art. While both of these claims could be claimed to be hyperbolic or taken out of context, or simply just not strong enough evidence, I can kind of see how one might argue that we have a clip where she's pretty definitively referring to herself as gay and a boy and doing drag. And then we have some clips of her referring to herself as a woman, but that's also something drag queens do well in drag. And so anti-trans people will accuse those who refer to Marsha as a woman as sort of filling in the blanks or making tenuous connections, of following the weaker evidence in hopes of pushing gender ideology, which seeks to rewrite gay people as trans and out of history. But what they won't tell you is that this weaker evidence is actually entirely supplementary. I can prove to you that Marsha P. Johnson was trans without ever even touching a single clip from this documentary in which she refers to herself as a woman. Again, if we can agree a drag queen is someone who usually works or plays part-time as a woman but doesn't transition socially or physically as part of that drag, then we can definitively rule out that Marsha was just a drag queen, with 2 quotes. The first is actually the interview where I got her definitions of drag queen and transsexual from, which I intentionally removed Marsha-specific context from earlier because I'm building a little narrative here, forgive me. This is from the interview from 1972. A drag queen is one that usually goes to a ball, and that's the only time she gets dressed up. A transsexual spends most of her life in drag. I never come out of drag to go anywhere. Everywhere I go, I get all dressed up. When you're a transsexual, you have hormone treatments and you're on your way to a sex change, and you never come out of female clothes.
You'd be considered a preoperative transsexual then. You don't know when you'd be able to go through the sex change?
Oh, most likely this year. I'm planning to go to Sweden. I'm working very hard to go.
It's cheaper there than it is at Johns Hopkins?
It's $300 for a change, but you've got to stay there for a year. Now, you might be wondering why she never went to Sweden. That's likely because she was incredibly poor. And while $300 doesn't sound like that expensive, I mean it is, but tickets to and from and a year in Sweden do sound that expensive, especially when you've often been homeless. Even earlier than that interview is one from 1970, where she expresses that she lives as a woman and started full-time socially presenting as one the year before.
And in 1965, I was coming out more, and I was still wearing makeup, but I was still going to jail just for wearing makeup. In 1969, I started wearing female attire full-time.
And later in that same interview, says she's planning on a sex change and is already on hormone replacement therapy.
And if I wear a lot of makeup at night, they automatically know I'm female. They really can't tell the difference about me because I'm on my way to be a sex change. I have hormone treatments and my bust is it's a small bust, but it's a nice handful.
So the position of the Marsha Wasn't Trans crew boils down to this, that she was just a drag queen who was never out of drag, and just a man who never identified as a woman, except for all the time she did, which was all the time. And that Marsha wasn't trans, she was just taking hormones, calling herself a woman and dressing as a woman using she, her pronouns, and planning on getting surgeries, and referred to herself as a transsexual. But Caelan, you might say. Why would she ever have referred to herself as a gay boy then, if she was actually trans? Well, there's several reasons why she might have said that. Reason number 1, it's called coming out. Imagine if every time someone referred to a gay person as a gay person, someone was like, really? Because in high school, you denied ever being gay. In fact, here's you in the yearbook at prom with a girl with "together forever" as your couple's quote. Something's not adding up. Checkmate, Straggit. No, people grow and change, and the language they use to discuss themselves does as well. Fred Sargent should know this. He went from gay to pig to not gay, back to gay to bigot to veteran. Reason number 2. we had entirely different terminology at the time. Anti-trans people like to whine about all the new terms, and back in my day, we just called them transsexuals and us normals. Well, the reason terms like cis or assigned gender at birth or non-binary were coined is because back in that day, language was much less specific and less clear. Gay was used as the umbrella term for the entire community and movement, much like queer is often used now. Trans women at the time often said things you're much less likely to hear now, such as I was born a boy, or using man as synonymous with assigned male at birth. Like, I'm a woman, but when he found out I was a man, he freaked out, or they couldn't tell I was not a real woman, as in found out I was trans and not a cis woman. You're not really going to hear things like that anymore because we have new language to describe those experiences that feels more accurate, more specific. As the community identifies and discusses the nuances and complicated relationships we have to sexuality and gender and the way society polices and enforces those, we find ways to discuss what makes our individual experiences different and create words to discuss those differences, like cis or assigned gender at birth, misgender, dysphoria. This happens with any marginalized community, and they all receive pushback from those who marginalize them. Think about terms like microaggression, which describes something incredibly old with a new term created because more specific language was needed to describe that specific phenomenon. They really push back against that one too. They're still talking about it. Reason 3, her relationship to gender was complicated. Maybe Marsha's relationship to gender not only changed as she understood more about herself, but maybe it was something she herself struggled to understand in some ways. I have no evidence of this, but it's a possibility that she identified as both a woman and a man, and saying woman was like the easiest shorthand for where she was on that spectrum. I see no real evidence of this, but I wouldn't discount it entirely as a possibility. Maybe she was non-binary. What I do know is that she used she, her pronouns, called herself a woman, did hormone replacement therapy, lived full-time as a woman, and wanted a sex change. I feel pretty confident in saying she was not just a gay man who did drag. When I present this evidence, overwhelming and irrefutable, to those who deny it, I'm often met with, nice try, Troon. I think I'll listen to someone who was there, usually referring to Fred Sargent. But Fred Sargent wasn't there. He didn't riot, according to him at least. And according to all available historical records, he stood about 50 feet away from the Stonewall Inn entrance, not participating in any physical anti-police action, watching Marsha P. Johnson dump trash all over a cop car, and telling his lover, who tried to support the rioters by yelling gay rights, to shut up. The next day, I think he wrote a very strongly worded letter. Thanks for your Yelp review of the police. Great contribution to the movement, Fred. And then just a few years later, becoming not just a cop, but a police lieutenant, got married to a woman, had kids, and then popped back up years later calling himself a Stonewall veteran and acting like a homophobic, transphobic, racist little shit, also known as a cop. So not only was he not there to the same degree many others were, like Stormy DeLaverie, a biracial butch lesbian drag king who actually started the riots by all accounts, if anyone really did, Fred wasn't there for most of the gay rights movement, as far as any records show. But beyond that, it's ludicrous to claim that he was there when discussing Marsha's personal relationship to her gender. What do you mean he was there? He didn't walk in Marsha's heels. He didn't stick around and fight for gay liberation like Marsha did. He didn't even know her. They weren't friends. And even if they were, we have Marsha's own words. This isn't a case of this was lost to time, so we have to rely on secondary accounts. Marsha mattered to the movement. Everyone knew it. That's why she was interviewed so extensively. That's why we have her words to go on. The only people rewriting history are transphobic assimilationist bootlickers like Fred Sargent. The next time someone decides to tell you Marsha was a gay man and a drag queen, feel free to drop this link in reply and then pay them no mind, because they are not worth your time. So yeah, I agree we should listen to someone who was there about what went on in Marsha's head. And I think the only person who meets those qualifications is Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson herself. He's silly. Sorry, I don't love having sponsors in every video, but I need them if I want to survive, thrive, and someday have a place to live where my workspace isn't a little windowless room. Eventually, I'd like my members over at patreon.com/Caelan Conrad to be enough to not take sponsors on every video. So if you want to help with that and get Benny's exclusive videos, watch parties, and Discord access, sign up. Also, go subscribe to my second channel, Respect the Dead, where we usually shit talk the dead, but sometimes we honor them. Releasing right after this video is our episode celebrating the life of Marsha P. Johnson in a way that skips most of the trauma of it all because it's been done to death and focuses on how loved, celebrated, and respected she was and is. Here's a preview of that episode coming right up. It'd mean the world to me if you'd go check that video out and subscribe to my second channel as well. Love you lots. Pay it no mind. If you've heard of the Stonewall Inn riots, which started on the night of June 28, 1969, you've heard the name Marsha P. Johnson. You've seen her photo, her trademark crown of flowers. If you've heard the name Marsha P. Johnson, you've heard the legend that she threw the first brick and ignited the spark that helped fuel the fire that burned inside the movement, pushing them in their fight against those who wished to keep them under boot. If you've heard of Marsha P. Johnson, maybe you've heard she was homeless, abused, suffered from addiction, forced into sex work, and then found dead in a river, ruled a suicide by police without inquiry, despite everyone who knew her screaming murder at the top of their lungs. If you've heard of Marsha P. Johnson, you know how she fought, how she bled, and how she died alone, because that's the story they tell. You know that story and how it ends, so I'm not going to tell you that story. I'm going to tell you the story of Marsha P. Johnson that you haven't heard. I want to tell you how she was generous, even when she had literally nothing, how she was bright and funny and strong and beautiful. I want to tell you how she was so loving and so loved in return, not how she suffered and not how she died. I want to tell you how she lived. Welcome back to Respect the Dead, the podcast where very rarely we do.